Hello, everyone, to this unique JLU Knowledge Series webinars. These have been especially created for all of you, and we have been covering different disciplines, perspective, careers for our audiences, which actually include a lot of youngsters, um, school-going kids, university students, as well as many of the working professionals and teachers and faculty. These webinars essentially have been curated by different schools and departments of Jharkhand HT University. Today's webinar, which has been curated by Jharkhand School of Journalism and Communication, um, has 3 episodes to it. We are starting with the advertising webinar, which where the expert is Mr. Kunal Sinha, and I'll come to it a bit later. It will be followed up by another one, which is around public relations. With the expert would be Mr. Hal Sindhi, and that would be followed up as a last or the third episode for the today would be by Mr. Simon Hine. That would be around journalism. So before we start the webinar for today, let me just tell you quickly about Jharkhand HCT University. Jharkhand HCT University is the most awarded university in Central India. It is absolutely a unique university in terms of its pedagogy, which is very practice-based. Its industry integration, the way that we have been able to update our syllabus and content every year. Some brilliant faculty, not only in-house and full-time, but also global faculty, which keep on visiting the classes virtually or in physical sense. We are currently offering about 56 degree programs for almost about 3,000 students for almost about 8 countries, and all these students come from almost about 27 to 28 different states of India. Unique part about Jharkhand City University is that we have about 27 international partnerships with the best universities in the world. And let me tell you, they are all very active partnerships. Students get a lot of exposure when it comes to international collaborations, exposure, summer schools, exchange programs, faculty exchange programs, a whole lot of those things, and including connected classrooms. Interestingly, yesterday, 24th of April, we had a 7th Foundation Day. And we have been going, very well in terms of the way that a university or a global academic institution should be going. Our motto is igniting mind, changing lives, and we have been trying to do that ever since. Coming to the webinar today, the expert we have today is a phenomenal and a global advertising thinker, I must say. The gentleman, Mr. Kunal Sinha, is the executive director of Kantar Advisory. He has almost about 30 years of global experience in strategy and insights in multiple markets of the world: China, India, Indonesia, Singapore, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and across several of the WPP companies, which, as you all know, is the world's biggest communication conglomerate. J. Walter Thompson, Ogilvy and Mather, the chairman Asia Pacific at Kantar Futures as well. Interesting part about Kunal is that he has won 11 Atticus Awards, and many of you would know that Atticus Awards are globally well-renowned, very respected awards by WPP for original thinking in communication areas. And Kunal has won 11 of them. People actually take a lifetime to win one. He has won 11, and out of this 11, the 3 are Grand Prix. He has a whole lot of experience when it comes to advertising, brands, communication, planning, and research. And it would be a great idea to have him today and listen to him. He has some interesting things to talk about. The topic that he has chosen today is the brands in the pandemic world. I would just urge all the listeners and viewers today is to see his presentation and see his insights, not only in context of the current COVID-19 perspective, but also how brands should behave and act in a critical and crisis-ridden times. So I'll hand it over to Kunal Sinha. Thank you so much, Kunal, but please take over the session and share with us what you've got.
Thank you, Professor Dibakar Shukla, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity. To all the listeners, I must tell you that Professor Shukla and I go back more than 20 years. He was my colleague during 2 phases at Ogilvy and Mather. and we had a wonderful time working on several projects together. And what was most perhaps significant about some of those projects is that while we were working in an advertising agency, these were projects that involved reaching either underprivileged underprivileged communities, or actually making some sort of a difference to the world around us. And there could be no better time to think of that role for branding and marketing than in the midst of a pandemic where we stand today. Uh, our behaviors have changed in the last 1 month, 1.5 months. Our sense of vulnerability has changed as we negotiate our feelings, our behavior, indeed our lifestyles, everything, the way we look at the world. And it gives us a unique opportunity to not only think about brands and marketing, but our own sense towards consumption, towards our own relationships, all of that. So look at it as a microcosm of the kind of challenges that this uncertain world throws towards us. But also from your perspective, most of you, I understand, are students, from the perspective of how your careers and lives would shape out as you are about to set into the big wide world. Because if there is one word that encapsulates what we are going to face in the future, that is uncertainty. And this COVID-19 pandemic has shown us how uncertain and how unsure we are of things. We don't know, we don't have a timeline of when things are going to get better, when things are going to get normal. And in that sort of uncertainty, how do companies, how do advertising agencies, how do academicians reevaluate the way they go about doing things that have been done in a particular way over the last 20, 30, maybe even longer number of years? So I'm going to speak for about 20, 25 minutes. I'm going to show you some examples of what companies and brands have done. But I'm really looking forward to answering the questions and answering or even having a discussion with some of you after speaking for about 20, 25 minutes. The root of everything that we are seeing right now goes back to the fact that as human beings, we are a very, very conflicted lot. While this entire COVID virus is playing out, I am told by a very good friend who's the Chief Customer Service Officer at Club Mahindra that June, July, August bookings at their resorts are running at 80 to 90%. Yeah. So do we as human beings, do we as consumers and people who have an expectation from the hospitality industry expect things to get back to normal so quickly? We're not sure, but we want to kind of hedge our bets, and we want to make sure that when things open out, we don't want to miss out on that opportunity. Or even when you look at the fact that around us, there are stories, and some of us probably experience it, of food shortages. There are people who get limited rations, and even we in the middle class kind of are very, very, a lot of us are very conscious about how much we consume and how much we buy. Yet, I'm sure everyone notices that one of the most popular themes of pictures that are circulating on social media today are of great cooking, of the kind of cuisine and experimentation that is going on. Simply because people who are not cooking, they seem to have more time, or sort of seem to be getting more inspired in order to cook for their families, for once the entire family is together, and maybe that's why they're taking so much interest. So you've got food shortage on one hand, and then you have this explosion of sort of food creativity, or indeed even food porn, as one might imagine, on the social media. And it is this kind of conflict which really leads to our behaviors and leads to our attitudes. Because in some of the research that we've done very, very recently, just about 2 weeks back, what we realized is that it is the disruption of our day-to-day life that we are more bothered about than the threat to our health. It is the health concern which should be which we should really be bothered about, but we're not, because somehow we think that this is not going to happen to us. We are fine in our homes because we practice social distancing, because we have practiced isolation, uh, which we've been asked to do by the government. So we are fine. It's the disruption that is bothering us more. The other sort of conflict is that attitudinally we are all very optimistic, and the behavior with when it comes to the hotel booking that I just spoke about is one example. In the same way, about 2 weeks back, when there was some amount of uncertainty when the lockdown would be lifted, and the airlines opened up their bookings, flights started getting, seats started getting sold out, even during this period at which we are right now. Yeah. So even while we recognize that there is scarcity, what is actually happening is that people are thinking ahead, thinking about what if things get worse. But it's not worse in the sense of a health concern. It's worse in terms of if we don't get the food, if we don't get the supplies that we need. And what is interesting, which is what this multi-country data shows us, that this feeling is the highest among the country surveys in all the countries in the world. So we're sort of an amazing society, really. And when you start thinking about how brands should respond, some of that will obviously play out. But the longer term implication of this is that a lot of people expect that there would be reduced spending across all formats of retail purchase. But the number of people who think that you know the purchase will actually be reduced significantly higher than that. It's about 4 times the number of people who think that spends would actually increase. And that really, is the nature of what we are, because, as the quote here says, disappointment won't last a lifetime unless you lie down and give in to it. So as a society, we are not giving up. We are not lying down and taking it. We are taking steps. We are staying optimistic. We are connecting with people. We are looking after each other. And that's the great thing. So even while there is a rocky road ahead, there's a huge amount of optimism. And the important thing for brands to recognize is that, is this pandemic going to be just a pause and will things recover? Or will it make us collectively, as humanity, as consumers, as Indian people, more cautious about the future? Because brands that recognize what people are going through right now will do well. Brands that do not engage in the conversation may have the danger of falling by the way, because consumers will think of them as brands that didn't care. And nothing is more important at this point in time than caring. And which is why consumers don't want to see any advertising as being exploited. Consumers don't want to see people exploiting their peers or stoking their peers. And the expectation of that they have of brands has actually gone up. Because today, more than ever, consumers expect brands to be trusted sources of accurate information, because there is so much of negativity or false news that is going around. Yeah, right from the president of the U.S. To someone who you scarcely know and forwards you a WhatsApp message. There is so much of falsehoods that is going around. Also, consumers expect that brands should attack the crisis and demonstrate that it can be fought. And to a certain extent, and this number is lower, and why, what makes it interesting, I'll tell you in a moment. People expect that brands should be practical and help consumers in their everyday lives. The reason why this is so important, and this tells us something about the relationship that consumers have with brands, is most people don't see brands as a practical choice. We buy brands because it boosts our lifestyle, because it makes us something that we want to be. They're not, things that solve everyday problems. But in today's world, in today's situation, brands have to be around to solve everyday problems. And as I will talk later, to recognize everyday heroes. And we've got some data which shows that brands should be informing consumers about their efforts to deal with the situation. They should offer a more optimistic point of view, a positive perspective, not, as I said earlier, exploit coronavirus to promote a brand. The other thing is that while there has to be positivity, uh, we should not be flippant or funny or humorous about it. And that's what a lot of people are saying. And more importantly, because there is so much of anxiety all around us, most consumers expect brands to adopt one that is one of reassurance. The fact that we are there to help, we are there because you are feeling anxious, and we'll continue to be around. There are not going to be shortages when things get back to normal. And people are also looking for very, very specific things. Yeah. For example, one of the ways, and these are very practical things. So, and we've seen companies and we've seen governments respond to some of these anxieties because, financial, because money is tight, especially for the masses, especially for the migrants. So flexible payment terms is an expectation that most people have. Offering free services. So you offer those free services. The brand should offer some service today that will earn the loyalty and the gratitude of consumers over a longer period of time. Not closing essential stores. Yeah. So that, and on the flip side, just closing non-essential stores because people are making those sacrifices. They've decided to put off the purchase of non-essential stores, and they expect that to happen. The fact that essential supplies will be available, very, very important. And all these expectations should score significantly more than the 37% of people who think that brands should continue advertising as if nothing has happened. So between offering sympathy, between offering support, or just staying silent, what is the best strategy for a brand today? Certainly, silence is not the best strategy because you don't want consumers to completely forget you. You also don't want consumers to say that, here's a brand that I trusted, I believed in for such a long time. And when the biggest crisis of our lives, the biggest crisis the world faced, it did nothing. It just stayed quiet, or it continued to advertise as normal. Now, the first thing that we saw was that a whole lot of brands saw that it was their responsibility to get out the message of social distancing. Social distancing was suddenly a new term that came up. And marketers just love buzzwords. And they found it very, very convenient and very, very sort of almost trendy to catch on to this idea of social distancing. And immediately we started seeing lots of brands which modified their logos or created communications that were about messages to do with social distancing. So here we see like everything from McDonald's to Audi to Fevicol, Just Herbs, Dainik Bhaskar, all of them, through their social media channels, started talking about social distancing by just increasing the space between their logos. And a lot of marketing commentators have actually said that, this message doesn't really do much because what consumers are expecting in today's situation is very, very genuine efforts. Those sort of making a distance between the logo was just seen as as lip service, and people just saw through the facade. The important behavior change, of course, something that a lot of brands were able to associate themselves with, is increased focus on hygiene. And that is very, very real because now we've seen that a lot more people have become conscious about washing hands. And the categories of hand sanitizers, hand washes, and toilet cleaners have seen a sharp jump in that. So brands which have traditionally stood for hygiene, like Lifebuoy, as well as Dettol. For them, this is godsend. They're doing wonderful and they're reinforcing that with messages. But what is also significant about them is they're not being very narrow minded about it. So even a Lifebuoy says, please use any soap nearest to you, not just Lifebuoy, but any soap like Lux, Dettol, Santur, or Godrej number one. And the same thing is reciprocated by Dettol. Let me just show you this ad. I hope it works. I'm not sure whether everyone was able to hear this, but I'll just move on. You would have got a sense of what this was about. Yeah. And in the same way, supermarket chains like Reliance Fresh put out communication, which is 11 steps to avoid getting infected with COVID-19. Very practical and very, very real. The other thing that brands are doing, and it's extremely important in today's context, is to support and celebrate heroes, because there are all kinds of heroes that are emerging. The least of which are the doctors, the frontline workers who are taking care of us. A very good example is what, say, the Taj Group is doing as they opened up their hotels to nurses, to doctors who were working in nearby hospitals. So they didn't have to go back home. They could just come back, to a nearby hotel and spend the night there in completely clean conditions. But even outside India, there were brands like AVO, which is an insurance brand in Hong Kong, which offered free coronavirus disease protection policy for all hospital staff across Hong Kong. Or Gojek, which is the equivalent of an Uber or an Ola in Southeast Asia, which offers free ride coupons to doctors and nurses who are working in the hospitals, and they can be dropped back home or wherever they need to go by Gojek drivers. They all got vouchers for that. That is very, very real and tangible offers that brands like these are making. But again, coming back to India, the people who are really keeping the wheels of the nation turning, who are making sure that the supplies are there for all of us, uh, are the truckers. And the brand Castrol actually created a lovely campaign, which is to salute truckers as India fights Corona. There are more brands that are doing this. And in this case, they very nicely integrate the brand promise along with a message of support. For nurses, for chemists, for the people who are cleaning our neighborhood, for the security guards, your nerves of steel bring us hope. Tata Consumer Products, on the other hand, again recognizes the excellent work that all these workers are doing, and they handed out 400,000 sachets of Tata tea for all these people. So while it's important to do this, what consumers need in the longer term is guidance with the new normal, the new norms of behavior that we will be expected to abide by, and the new behaviors that we have to learn as we negotiate the virus. So State Bank of India, again, large bank, expected not to respond so quickly, but did a wonderful job in the first week of the coronavirus spread in India, because they realized that people have to be will be stuck at home, and at that point in time there was this looming deadline of filing your taxes by 31st of March. They created this whole facility that you could pay your taxes online while you're working from home or wherever you are. The fact that the bank is working, and if at all you had to go to the bank, there will be someone to serve you, but you would obviously prefer that you do all your transactions digitally. And that apart, they made a huge commitment of 0.25% of their annual profit to help fight COVID-19. These are very, very real and very, very tangible kind of initiatives, which are rooted in the fact that people's needs have changed. People need to do things differently. How do you enable them to do that? Or another brand that I was associated with and continue to be, which is a brand of mattresses. And the first instinct was, can we say anything at all? But then what we realized was that at this point in time, people's anxieties are very high, and what they need at the end of the day is some kind of reassurance, some kind of comforting. And that's where we decided to bring out the tradition of the bedtime story. People were consuming more content, of course, but how do you create that bond between parents and a child, between grandparents and grandchildren, and created this whole series, also inviting people who listened in to start sending their stories. So here's an opportunity of looking at some kind of behavior that could be reinforced, and an emotion that is perhaps very, very necessary at this point in time. In the interest of time, I will quickly skip over this other example, which is again what Castrol did, encouraging or exhorting people to hang up their keys and not go out and drive their vehicles. But in the process, they recognized again the unsung heroes. But even recognizing the fact that older people are feeling very anxious, they can't go out, sometimes they are alone, not with their children. So Tata Tea, again, which has a long-term proposition, which is called Jago Re, which is about awakening, has been encouraging people to connect with their elders, and also encouraging elders about what they could do to stay connected and stay active, continue to follow your regular routine, again, alleviating their anxieties and their fears. So this is what brands have been doing, but as we would have recognized, most of the brands have really been talking to the middle class. Uh, the big question I have at this point in time for brands is that we've seen thousands and millions of migrants who've been in huge, challenging circumstances. Which are the brands that have offered them assistance? This is an opportunity to really start reaching out to those people. And there'll be another wave when they come back, because again, they will need reassurance that it's safe to come back. And you would have to avoid crowding when people come back. So, but certainly for transportation companies, it's a huge opportunity to be engaging with migrants throughout this crisis. Post-lockdown, for brands, both availability and affordability will become a far more important concern than brand preference, because people have not got paid, a lot of the migrants, of course, and even across the corporate sector, where salaries are being cut down because companies are not just selling. So people will be constrained. How do you deal with that situation? This is another question that brands will have to handle in the post sort of COVID situation, but they need to start preparing for that now. So I just wanted to pose these questions because this is certainly something that not only brands, but students like yourself, in this age where user-generated content can go such a long way, need to start thinking about. And most importantly, brands will now start to align even more with long-term societal interests. This is such a dramatic picture, which I'm sure a lot of you would have seen, is that shut down the world and the world becomes better, which means that if everything that we were saying earlier about the world taking a very, very long time to recover may not necessarily be true. And it is only through human action that this change has happened between completely gray skies and blue skies, completely dirty waters and clean waters. So even while there is long-term societal interest that is important, brands can do that, and they can start doing that sooner than later. You as students have the opportunity of a lifetime to redefine branding at this point in time. The question is, will you take it? I'm sure, and I'm absolutely confident that you will. I'm open to questions. I've got some questions already, and depending on how Professor Divakar would like me to take it, we can start addressing that. Yeah.
So, Kunal, thank you so much. This was very interesting. I obviously, there was some the audience had sent some questions to us as well. But there's some other set of people also which are posing questions to us. So I'll take the questions which are being received right now, and I'll take it up some other questions which you have already received earlier. So somebody named Aditya Sharma wants to know what will be the consumer behavior as they take protective actions against the virus is likely to be, which is going to which would have a social and economic impact. For example, he wants to know what is going to be the consumer behaviors vis-a-vis, say, Chinese products.
Vis-a-vis, sorry, which products?
Vis-a-vis Chinese products, Chinese brands.
Okay, yeah. So there is no doubt that consumers are going to reevaluate their relationship with brands and relationship with products. So there is, I believe, going to be some sort of reprioritization of their interests and going forward. So, for example, one of the things that you're likely to see is that we will get far more careful about eating out because our general hygiene consciousness has gone up. Yeah, we will start caring for our surroundings much more because, again, we think and we recognize what poor hygiene standards can get us into. We will definitely start getting more protective about our local economy because we've seen the damage that the virus has caused. So there will certainly be, at least in the short term, a bit of closing in and belief in your local products. Some of it will initially be very, very, we wouldn't have an option simply because, we don't know how long will it take for global transportation systems and global logistics systems to kick back into the same sort of speed as before. But certainly when you talk about Chinese products, everyone will be more careful for some time at least, until they're absolutely sure about the safety of those products. And in the same way, other countries, there would definitely be a decline at least over the next 1 to 2 years, in tourism to places in Europe. Because, I mean, one is people would probably not want to go very far out. They would want to stay closer to their homes. And also because we won't be sure about what are the kind of, again, safety standards and protection possibilities that one would have when you start visiting countries which we always thought were very healthy and very safe. Uh, most of Europe, most of North America, um, and the COVID-19 episode has shown that no, it doesn't always happen that way. And those countries are as vulnerable as any other third world country.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, Kunal. And our friend Kapil Pandey joins in as an audience and has posed
Hi,
a
Kapil.
question to you. Yes. So he has posed a question. He says, "Do you see a second wave of Swadeshi brands getting more further larger consumer comfort?" And example like SBI, Haldiram, Tata, Patanjali, and all.
Uh, and like I said, it is linked to what I mentioned earlier, that local brands would definitely get a fillip. Um, and I mean, why even local brands? One of the things that we're probably experiencing, and it's been written about, is that suddenly in this crisis, it's your local kirana store which is actually bailing you out. Yeah, it's not the traditional big e-commerce players. I mean, they have actually struggled in being able to serve the needs of the consumers, but your neighborhood Parchunwala and Kirana store has been working round the clock because they know, if they're not allowed to get onto the main roads, they know the side roads to get, stuff to you. So, and they know what is essential commodities that people in a particular area need, and they deliver that to them. So that is the advantage that local brands and local companies have, that you have a very good understanding of what the preferences, but also what the fears and concerns are, and importantly, the terrain of the land. Because a lot of it, the biggest challenge really, and that's the other thing that, we always think of brands, especially in advertising, you think of it in the mind space. But again, the COVID-19 situation has shown how much are we dependent on logistics. Yeah, on global supply chains, on your local supply chains. If the supply chain doesn't work and isn't safe, things are not going to get to us. Yeah. So in that sort of situation, your sort of anything that is local is definitely going to benefit, at least in the short run, and hopefully in the longer run.
Thanks, Kunal. Kunal, Varsha, who is the communication student at the undergraduate level, asked a question, and I have two questions in a similar vein, so I'm merging it up. So
Yeah.
she's asking, I mean, it's closer to that the brands today are walking a very tightrope walk, during the COVID-19 in terms of what they have to communicate, how to communicate, what is the tonality, and those things part of it. So what are the things which the brands, and I know that you mentioned something in your presentation as well, but if you can throw light on how are the brands going to change the tonality of everything else? I mean, post COVID world.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I mean, the tone definitely has to be very reassuring. The first thing that consumers will look out for as they start emerging is that brands are available, because there are things that they have denied themselves for a period of time, and they would want to buy those things. And it's going back to the same sort of supply chain question, uh, and companies will have to inform the consumers that the brand is available. What kind of channels is it available? Is it a safe channel that the brand is available? So those messages of reassurance and assurance of service, of quality, all those things will be very, very important. Yeah, more than images. Messages about imagery or desire. Yeah. So that definitely is going to happen. The second thing is that, I suspect there will be a sudden rush for a lot of brands trying to take a health angle to them. Yeah. So, brands will try to find some kind of health benefit, whether it's in the short term or the longer term, as they emerge out of the post-COVID world. Yeah, I mean, those are the two key things I think which will emerge post-COVID-19.
Okay. Anubhav Shrivastava wants to know actually the impact of Corona pandemic on the brand management. But I had a related question which I'm trying to merge the two. Kunal, recently, I mean, some time back, Louis Vuitton actually had, suspended their production of luxury products, and they kind of shifted to churning out hand sanitizers for the Parisian hospitals rather than high-end perfumes and those things. So, how are the brands, not just in terms of communication, but how are the brands or the companies going to change the entire, response to such crisis which happen across the consumers? Would it become a norm, like, for example, Louis Vuitton has done it?
Um, so I don't think you can actually predict what new demands might emerge in the future, right? The key thing is agility. Yeah, recognizing the fact that this is an uncertain world, anything might happen. Yeah. Um, I'll give you another example. We're working on a large sort of a project for a large conglomerate, and one of the things that they are definitely interested in is the impact of disruptions. Now, disruptions could be of many kinds. This is a massive health, economic, logistical disruption of a scale that no one has thought about before. But it's not that disruptions haven't happened. I mean, think of the Indian Ocean tsunami 15 20 years back, and the massive disruption it caused in, say, automotive supply chains, because a lot of them were based in Thailand and Indonesia, which were really badly affected. Which means that as we recognize that climate change is an important sort of factor that's going to have an impact on the on everything from production to consumption to disasters, to natural disasters, companies need to start thinking about that, right? So the answer to that is very simply drawing up those scenarios, thinking of what might happen, and making sure that there is some kind of contingency plan so that when something happens, you are prepared to and you can pivot in order to serve an immediate requirement, or whether that's temporary or permanent.
That's a very good point, Kunal. And as many brand thinkers say that one needs to have that proactive brand shield prepared in some sense after creating the scenario. Kunal, there have been a lot of kind of conversations, and not just in context to the pandemic. Earlier also, people used to talk of this brand authenticity part of it, where how authentic the brand is, what is the real self, and those things. So, do you think this narrative and conversations around being authentic would become even more relevant now, since the world has seen this pandemic and things which are happening?
Oh, certainly, yeah. And when I talked about initially, companies started talking about social distancing. Uh, you know, it seemed less authentic than some of the efforts, some of the very genuine efforts that brands were taking. And the thing about authenticity in today's day and age of social media and complete transparency is that consumers will look for flaws. Consumers will look for stories and find them, and which is why the voice of the brand needs to be absolutely authentic, uh, and companies gradually need to let their own consumers take over that voice of the brand, yeah, rather than thinking that it can be sort of created in corporate headquarters or in the advertising agency I mean, that's no longer how things work. Yeah. Authenticity really means that the boundary between, the brand and the consumers, or its consumers and fans, has blurred. Yeah. And that's how brands become more real, which is pretty much the future of brands. And the other thing is that, just allowing consumers to participate in that process is the most authentic thing that a brand could really do.
It's an excellent point, Kunal, and I go back to what you said and everyone who is studying advertising, maybe practicing advertising, or also wants to take up advertising, should keep in mind this particular point what Kunal said, and that consumers taking over or maybe participating in creating a voice and tonality for the brand. I think it's so pertinent even from the social media perspectives as well. Uh, Kunal, just a point, because there are a lot of students who are attending this webinar, and they want to hear from you. I know advertising and communication has always been a great, exciting career choice for many people. What would be your advice to be many students who want to take up advertising as a career choice?
That's a a very big question. Yeah. Um, the I mean, obviously, learning the tools, learning the sort of understanding what drives people's behaviors and people's mindsets is very much part of that. But there are sort of a few I think fundamentals. One is having a very, very high level of curiosity with the world. What is happening? Why is it happening? What are the kind of changes going on in the world? Not just the world around you, but everywhere. Because that is how you start making sense. First, you get completely confused, but then you start making sense of what's going on. Uh, Keeping track of popular culture is such an important part of doing great advertising, because that ultimately helps you in the language, the tone, the tonality, who connects with whom. All that is very, very important. Yeah. Now, over the years, uh, what one has realized is the source of the creativity has changed and morphed in so many ways. In the 60s and 70s, people would, most of the advertising creative people were English educated, and most of their reference points were, theater and film and music, which were Western. Yeah. And most of the advertising reflected that sensibility. Uh, and then there was a whole wave of going back to Indianness and roots and understanding what's going on there and using that language. And legends like Piyush Pandey and Prasoon Joshi have been masters of that. Yeah. Today things are very different. Today the inspiration comes from TikTok. Yeah. Uh, and following TikTok and seeing how much of creativity there is. Now, there are people who in the initial stages, people would dismiss TikTok as, oh, it's just some young kids having fun. Uh, but then when you start analyzing if there's a message behind it, a lot of times we try to overthink things, and that's when you realize that maybe there's not a message, but when you look for a whole lot of such stimulus or such uh, kinds of creativity, you start discovering patterns. You start understanding what is making this bored girl who's not necessarily very good at studies in a small town creating such wonderful content. Yeah. Uh, so I think having that curiosity and following uh, what's happening with culture are the two most important things, because that is something that brand managers and the marketers who are your clients usually do not pick up in their MBAs. Yeah, which is very structured, which is very analytical. I think advertising is much more free flowing. It is much more inspirational. It is much more about the feelings and emotions of human behavior. Uh, and then when you actually look at sort of the analysis and studies which tell you that it is emotional advertising which gets you about 5 times better results than logical or functional advertising. Yeah. So it's not about people don't change their minds because you tell them that this has X% something and that has Y% something else. That's not why people change their minds. People change their minds because they admire someone and see that person doing something or buying something, and they imitate that action. Yeah, or they want to be completely different. So they're rebelling against a group of people in their classroom, someone that they don't like in the office, and they want to do something that is very different. Those are the kind of emotional reasons why people make their choices and choose their brands.
Yeah, that was a good one, Kunal, because many times what we've heard is that advertising also is all about behavioral change to a larger extent, as people say. Now, if that is true, then in that case, it becomes absolutely imperative for advertising students as well as professionals to be close to the consumers, to be curious, as you rightly said it, and also to understand what is the popular culture which goes around. Uh, I just wanted to add one more thing to it, is if you can respond to it, is many times we see in the classes and students who are studying advertising or public relations and those things, often get excited about advertising as a career or advertising as a profession, more from creating things. I mean, in terms of copywriting, creating a TV commercial or something of that nature. But you being, you have spent so much, time in this particular area. Uh, where do you think, how do you think is a advertising research and advertising planning becomes, I mean, somebody wanting to specialize in that area, how important it is to a brand communication?
Oh, very, very important. Yeah. So even when I say I talked about the creation part. It is the understanding part, which is what a planner, advertising strategist, or a planner does. Um, I I'll just go back to the traditional definition of a planner, which I don't think has changed, which is the consumer's representative in the agency. Yeah, or the consumer's representative when you're going in and meeting a client who has asked you to create an ad. Yeah, and when we talk about being a consumer representative, it is having the ability to understand, analyze, spot the trends, do all of that, and then ultimately make it relevant to the brand's challenges. Yeah. So it's the ability to connect those, uh, that is absolutely essential. And that will come through the training that you get at a good institution. And that will come once you're in the job, because those are the kind of challenges that you will be thrown, if you're an advertising planner. The second part of a strategist or a planner's job is inspiration, because you have to get a set of people, who are the creative people, uh, to be able to come up with ideas that haven't been thought of before. How do you inspire them? And one very, very good way I've found of inspiring people is simply through telling the story. So you have to translate a set of data that you've analyzed, put emotion and heart into it, and narrate that as a story to a creative person who will come up with the ideas. Yeah. Then once you sort of arrived at the ideas, or sometimes together, or sometimes the creative person has or the creative teams have done that, and you like the idea, then you follow the way path back, because you've got to take that idea and go and sell it to your client. Yeah. And that is where you have to make sure that the idea in some ways will solve the business problem that the client has. Yeah. And at the same time, you have to make sure that the most creative ideas which your creative team has come up are the ones that are sold. And that is where advertising research really comes in, because at the end of the day, most clients can't make up their minds, and they say, okay, give us option 1, option 2, option 3, and then let's take it to the consumer and test it. And that is where, again, you have to be smart about it, because who do you go to? Because pure consumer responses may not always give you the correct answer. Yeah. And that's again where the sort of understanding that an advertising planner can bring in, which is the interpretation of the research. Yeah. So these are sort of different dimensions, if you will, of a strategist's role and a strategist's job that are required. Yeah. And like I said, you learn the basics of that in a good communications school, and then you build upon it when you start working.
Sure, sure. Kunal, you said it somewhere that often the industry, or whether it is advertising, usually it's not such a pessimistic kind of a way forward. It's surprising how well and how quickly we often bounce back. So from that context, I'm pretty sure that even advertising as a profession, as an industry, I'm not saying as a profession, but more as a dispense, I'm pretty sure that post-COVID, once it starts tapering down, would start to bounce back, and the advertising and communication as a profession, or somebody who wants to take it up as a profession, would obviously would be as exciting as it has been always. As you have been, Kunal, you have visited Jharkhand Lake City University also. Just the closing shots that you may have a view about the university, and you're part of it. You're part of our university.
Yeah. No, I'm really. It's a privilege to be part of Jharkhand Lake City University. I mean, from the time that you invited me to a wonderful event on campus, and the inauguration of absolutely fantastic studio. I think to now, when I'm part of the academic board and will help shape the syllabus, which I'm really looking forward to, because one of the key things of any sort of state-of-the-art program is to keep things relevant, to the future needs of the student, not today's needs, but to the future needs of students, because things are changing so fast. Yeah. So the environment of the campus is fantastic. The people that you invite to interact with the students are absolutely top notch. You have entrepreneurs, the sort of the management of the school, again, very, very inspirational figures. You yourself, the kind of dynamism that you show in shaping the school and the program. I'm really looking forward to, helping shape the curriculum and engaging more deeply with the students.
Thank you so much, Kunal. You have been such a fabulous, expert and colleague for all of us, and sharing your thoughts. I know you have so much to offer, and I have seen you over the period of time. You have so much to offer, and so thank you so much for taking out time and doing it for us. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of students are going to benefit from what you said, and I'm 200% sure that I'm going to keep on getting a lot of questions from them. If I get them, I'll just bundle up together and share.
Sure. So always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, and I'll stay in touch.